The biggest reason I didn't want to follow God was simple. I didn't want anyone telling me what to do. I believed God was the greatest threat to my freedom. Because if the Bible was true, then I was no longer the one who decided what was right and wrong. But what I didn't understand back then was that the freedom I was trying to protect had already begun to control me. God wasn't taking away my freedom. I was being controlled by the very things I believed were making me free. If I had to describe my view of the Bible in one word, it would be manipulation. I was convinced the Bible was corrupt, that it wasn't really about God, but about controlling people. I believed church authorities used fear to make people obey, to submit, to stop asking questions. Because in my mind, disobeying the authority of the church automatically meant disobeying God. And the consequence was clear: eternal punishment in hell. That's how I saw God too. Not as a father who wanted a relationship with me, but as a tyrant, a dictator, a God I had to please by giving up the things that brought me pleasure. So the question was simple. Why would I give up my freedom for something I wasn't even sure existed? The problem was that, to me, freedom had a very clear meaning. Freedom meant not having to obey anyone. All my life, I felt like someone was always telling me what to do. At home, my parents told me what I had to do. Outside, people had expectations of me. At school, teachers told me where to sit and what to do. There was always someone with a rule, an expectation, or a limit. And I came to believe that true freedom began when I no longer depended on anyone. When I didn't have to answer to anyone. When I could do whatever I wanted. That's how I defined freedom. If I wanted to smoke, I smoked. If I wanted to drink and party, I could. If I wanted to make certain choices in my relationships, I made them. I decided. I was responsible for my own life. No one had the right to tell me how to live. In my mind, it was simple. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I decide. It's my life. And that's where I had a problem with God. Because if the Bible was true, then I was no longer the final authority. It meant I had to obey. And I didn't want that. The problem was that, deep down, I knew many of the things I was doing weren't good. I didn't need someone else to prove it to me. I could see the consequences. I saw the people getting hurt. I saw their reactions. I saw the look in their eyes after some of the decisions I made. And sometimes I felt sorry, but not enough to change. If someone suffered because of my choices, I told myself it was their problem. I'd say, everyone is responsible for their own life. People have done the same to me. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I told myself I was still young, that I had time, that I needed to live my life, that I could try a little of everything and stop whenever I wanted. But over time, I started to notice something. The freedom I was defending wasn't making me happier. The things that were supposed to satisfy me started leaving me empty. At first, they seemed to give me something. But when everything got quiet, all the things I was trying to run from came back. And that's when I started asking myself, if my freedom is leading me to a place where I'm no longer okay, is it really freedom? I was stressed. I was anxious. I couldn't enjoy the simple things anymore. I was always chasing something more. I wanted people to think well of me, but I didn't think well of myself. People saw the outside, but only I knew what was inside. And yet, something didn't add up. If God really was a tyrant, if the Bible really was only about control, then why did the people who followed him seem freer than I was? One moment that changed the way I saw Christianity was when I went to church with my cousin. Up until then, I had a very clear picture of Christians. I saw them as weak people, people who didn't have the courage to really live. And I didn't respect weakness. I've always gotten along better with people who had strong personalities, people who refused to be controlled. An older man came to the front to share his testimony, and the first thing that caught my attention was him. You could tell he hadn't been a weak man. He had a presence. He seemed like someone who had been respected and even feared. So I asked myself, how does someone like that end up following God? How does a strong man choose what I saw as a life of giving things up? But what surprised me the most was something else. His peace. He didn't look like someone who had lost something. He didn't seem sad. He seemed content. He seemed free. And that's when my view of Christianity started to change. Maybe the problem wasn't that God takes away people's freedom. Maybe I simply didn't understand what freedom really is. As I kept reading the Bible, I started seeing God differently. Before, I believed God was a tyrant, a God who asked me to give up the things I enjoyed just to please Him. But, little by little, I began to see something different. I started looking at God the same way I came to look at my parents. When I was younger, I thought they were just trying to control me. But later, I realized that many of the boundaries they set were there because they wanted to protect me. Not because they didn't want me to be happy, but because they could see things I couldn't. And I began to wonder if God was doing the same. Maybe those boundaries weren't there because God wanted to take away my joy. Maybe they were there because He sees consequences that I can't. I started to understand why the Bible calls certain things sin. Not simply because God says don't, but because those things destroy. They hurt people. And, in the end, they hurt us too. I also began to see the relationship between Jesus and God. Jesus obeyed not because He was forced to. He trusted His Father, even in the hardest moments. And that's when I began to understand that obeying God isn't the loss of freedom. It's trust. I used to believe the Bible was taking away my freedom. Today, I believe the exact opposite. Because I discovered that the very things I thought were making me free had actually gained power over me. I thought I was free because no one told me what to do. But I didn't realize that certain desires, pleasures, and choices were starting to control me. The Bible didn't take away my freedom. It showed me the freedom I never understood.